Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today we'll be discussing more physics things. So in the previous episodes we've discussed quite a few topics. We discussed the logic pyramid and how logic and the diction, the words we use to describe these processes, and what ontology is and what a vocabulary is extensively, and how that transmits information through our species and through the universe in general. So what I'm going to do here is we're going to kind of try to play with some physics, but now what has to be pretty rather apparent is that I'm not really necessarily inventing new words. I'm using all of the words that already exist at different levels of generality, and we expand out downwards. Again, just to have a picture in your head doesn't really have that much relevance to be a pyramid, but just from one point of knowledge, one physical context, one physical piece of evidence, and it spreads out, and the words you use just have a gradation to how specific they are, and then there's different words for how specific something is and how general something is. And so within that pyramid, within that structure, the more specific you get, you can try to connect these different pieces of logic, and I'll create a visual, and that will be the next episode. But this episode, what we're really going to try to do is just discuss some of those physical terms. But within that logical pyramid, we can start showing how we can connect this word logically and physically to this word over here, to this word over here, to this piece of logic over here with using this word and that word, and so on and so forth. And so there's still not a bunch of words, but when you reduce or when you scale a proof, right? So what I'm doing is I'm proving things. I am showing you and demonstrating why. And at the end of the proof, hopefully, or what will have to occur, is me show complete generality to complete specificity of the use of the word sensorality. In the same way, speciality is any context you use the word special. I didn't invent the word special. It is just, I showed enough specificity and then scaled that up to enough generality in which it applied to a level of known to literally everybody. Everybody immediately gets what I'm saying. And so that's kind of like, again, when anybody's an expert at their field or any historical person is like, they have a quote that applies to a lot of things. What they've done is they've understood a bunch of logic and experience and encapsulated that and packaged that up in a quote or a word. And so that is what we're doing with ontology, the correct way to talk about physical systems for all physical systems, irregardless of the observer, right? The science is irrespective of Brad. My pen exists irrespective of me holding it. I could die right now, I'm dead. My pen is still here, it exists irrespective of me. And so we have that. There's a bunch of words, again, at the generality level of, I guess at the interplay of specificity and generality, or generality and specificity for the word sensorality at the fundamental physical level with the known physical ontology words, or ontological words in physics, is what we're going to do today. Just kind of discuss the different words, where I'm still trying to put things together, but again, it's hard to state my derivation process. Isn't I don't get stuck in terms of there's no more logic. You just exhaust all of the theorems you can do to relate certain words to different other words, and so you just have to. I'm more like a brute force logician where I just pound things with fact and I just state fact. And after a while, I intuitively understand what it is, and I can articulate it very simply, very generally, and it becomes a proof. And so we're going to go over the concepts that I'm working on right now. We're going to be working through, because I've already done this entire process. But again, when it's a fundamental ontological word, you have to go through all of the ontology. So I have to rework all of the logic or extend what the logical connections are of speciality, which I've already done behind closed doors. People haven't seen that. And so I'm doing it again. So I have to do that with all of the knowledge that was known before, in addition to the knowledge that people haven't seen that's behind closed doors that I also derived. I've already done this entire process completely. In a mathematical sense, completely, not in just like a slang term. But that gets to another point that from the last episode, we talked about Chris Langan, and he said something else that I didn't mention in the episode that was very, very correct. But it's the part that's hard to articulate because you literally can't articulate it. But in this, we'll talk about it in a physical context, but in a logical context, generating the absolute minimum to establish an axiomatic structure is what I'm doing. That's what I already have done. And it's just all of my work, every bit of the thing I do with language is just consolidating enough logic to be able to prove an axiom. And so, but the concept of generating an absolute minimum, like I haven't articulated every single theorem for what speciality is, right? Speciality is this, and you can say infinitely many things. And that's true with any word, because again, we have nodes of knowledge here, 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 and what a proof is at the absolute pure logical level is just connecting the words we use to articulate that experience, that fundamental truth behind the words. And so that is really what's going on, and I'm just doing it publicly and at a level that's complete generality for fundamental ontology. But generating an absolute minimum, and so once, again, think of it like once you get enough points of knowledge and then you can really articulate something, then it becomes an axiom, but it's still, again, you haven't provided a set of all theorems that are related to that word. And so there's always different connections that you have to make with fundamental words that have already been used, from Einstein, Newton, Dirac, Kepler, Hooke, all of the people that have come previously. And at the species level, you're expanding, the generality has to be literally to the species level. And so you create a word of complete generality, and that is evident in our language with the suffix of y, like the letter y, anytime you, at least in the English language, and there's similar functions in other languages or any other language, but you have the letter y is complete generality for, makes a word completely general, and then the specificity, right, sense or speciality is the axiom that I proved, and special was the fundamental empirical evidence, people calling each other special, is the evidence or the empirical proof that the axiom exists, and I just showed the logic derivation from speciality, the word, to special, the word. And so, and we have to jump around all of the fundamental because fundamental physics is a very specific, right? We have increased our specificity a lot. Proof, there's not that many theoretical physicists, and there's very few people that contribute to ontology at any level, ever. And so, that's kind of awesome and fun. But, so going through the concepts, we're going to continue building these concepts so we can establish a tension path. And what a tension path is, again, just some object, discrete object that has started out as vibration and stabilized into, or is composed of particles, fermions and bosons, we'll just say that, but mass containing discrete systems from vibration into light, and then from light into mass. And so we've talked about vibration stabilizing into mass. Now a tension path is just two objects with mass, with inertia, with resistance to motion or change in motion, touching each other. But you can't really touch each other, right? We went over that. You would need to approach infinite energy to be able to actually push the two electrons together. And so we need to define a fundamental universal minimum density. And let me get out my big supercomputer, and it is the density of the electron. And so, well, I guess you could do if you can calculate any sense of a density for three quarks bounded together, I guess that would be. My point is, like we discussed before, we have physical limitations based on our literally our physical, our measuring apparatuses, our equipment, our machines, our technology. The super collider can't, you have to have a certain amount of mass to generate the force to whip around the particles and smash them together. And so, but the universal density, for any practical purposes and theoretical purposes, there is a universal minimum. And so, because again, fundamentally vibration doesn't have a unit. Vibration came before light. And so it's just, what is vibrating? It's not intuitively correct to think of vibration as stuff vibrating, because the vibration was just the thing. But we don't have, again, that stabilized into light, and then light into mass. And so, but we get to, well, we can say, we talked a little bit about the moment of inertia just being defined as the angular velocity divided by the angular momentum. And so again, just logically, we can cancel out angular. Again, I don't do equations. Dimensionless analysis literally connects the logic, not the manifestations with these equations, which are limited. Language is also limited, but it is broader than mathematics, just as, like, but again, it's all so all of these subjects just flow together to me. There's no difference. But just conceptually, velocity. Something with mass is displaced through space, but now we have to conceptualize mass as the space. The vibration stabilizes into light, light into mass. The mass is, again, is the environment, is the thing creating shape, creating form. So how do we really calculate displacement? That's divided by momentum, mass times velocity. So why are we dividing by the velocity divided by the velocity times the mass? So I don't really get the kind of the motivation for that definition whatsoever. But again, what is the solution? Here's how we move the logic forward. Here's the correct thing. That's what I'm saying. I don't know, but I just have to build the logic around it, and then something will pop out. But what we can deduce very simply is inertia is proportional to mass. The heavier something is, the harder it is to move or change its state of motion, which is empirically true and demonstrably true to anybody, trivially. And inertia is proportional to force. In the most general case, what is inertia? It's a different word than mass, but it's basically just the more massive something is, the more inertial it is, the more it's not inert, because inert is like non-reactive, because it kind of relates to inertia. But see, that's the point, is I just build the logic around and then the words just plug together. But no, I have to do that in context of sensorality and how it relates to that word. So that's why it's just, like when you're at the end of these levels of proofs, it just feels like you know nothing. You just have to talk it through and just see what comes out. But mass is a scalar that is known, but intuitively kind of, I think, what progresses the intuition is, again, that mass is, again, just bounded by a measurement limit, and it's an extreme condensation of vibration. And so it makes sense to be a scalar because it has no real unit. And so it's just, but then you can't have any intuition, so you just say, here's a fundamental minimum, and it's true, and it is true, but it's measurably true because we couldn't measure anything further. But dimension is discrete. That's why we have, forward, backward, up and down, left and right. And then we have space-time, space continuums. There's 14 million continuum dimensions. No, there's not. It's, again, empirically evident. I don't want to say it's empirically evident, but it is logically evident. But the discreteness of continuity, the fact that this pen can move independently of me, is evident, or is the motivation as to why we have numbers in the first place, or why we can have numbers. If everything was completely continuous, there would be no differentiation. There would be no one thing, two things, many things. And so the discreteness of, again, space, which is deformation caused by the condensation of vibration into mass, and then what am I talking about? Discreteness, right? Because that's where kind of really the motivation of quanta really came from, was was really just identifying an independent system, or saying there can be independent systems. Motion is possible, is really what that says. But that's why we have numbers in the first place. And again, then it's some iteration. There's 3 iterations of vibration that stabilizes resonance. And there's something else. There's a lot of things applied to electromagnetism in there. That'll be a different video. This is strictly the mechanics. And again, defining that tension path, simply how do 2 objects connect to one another, and how do their motions affect one another. So again, I can't really, and subsequently nobody, not because I say so, because evidently no one can, comment more logically on inertia. We have our universal fundamental minimum. It makes a lot of sense to revisit the idea of equilibrium. Vibration equilibrates, right? When I'm sitting here and we did the pen thing, and you can see, right, like we're not at a quantum scale or the Planck length, and it's still kind of, if I do it right, it looks like this is wiggling, and that's rhythm putting a discrete object into motion, and it looks continuous, it looks fluid, it looks like it bends. And so we talked about that again, I think literally the first exact lecture, the introduction. So you have to understand this proof, this logical proof that I'm doing to literally establish the logical base minimum to axioma, make this an axiom. It is literally thousands upon thousands of theorems a day, every single day, continuously, as long as I'm consciously awake, or if I'm dreaming, this stuff is occurring. So that's fun. But what was I saying? Oh, the equilibrium. And so, but vibration, right? Assuming you have a continuous energy source, right? because you'd have some dissipation with nothing. There's no perpetual motion machines, and so vibration will stabilize, and so we have equilibrium as the only real equilibrium, stable equilibrium. And then I just have unstable equilibrium is an oxymoron. It is a paradox. You can't have something that is stable but not in equilibrium. And so that's like, again, in classical mechanics today, or it's just, if you have a peak, a mountain, if you're on top of a mountain, if you're a ball on top of a mountain, any perturbation, any agitation to your state of motion is going to make you roll down the mountain. That's what they would say as unstable equilibrium. I'm not sure the exact logic as to why Newton went to that, but unstable equilibrium logically is it's inconsistent, therefore it's a paradox, and so that just doesn't make any sense. But equilibrium in physical reality, as articulated, it is literally just vibration in a stable state, or in a continuous wave kind of motion. But that's where, again, the discreteness of independent systems is where the things where it says it behaves like a particle and a wave. But again, remember the vibration aspect is the thing that's the thing that's waving, and the mass thing is the thing that's moving. So, but we live in 3 dimensions, so this isn't just purely vibration, and so it can move like this, and so that's why it behaves like a particle and a wave. That's why it's only 2 things, and so the 3 being the first prime number. Well, again, there are no numbers, but they represent quantities. Quantities represent independent systems, or locally independent systems to be logically consistent. Is why you have, again, all things that when you root a function, or when you ask where do 2 things connect, you're really asking where the zeroing point is. Again, you can't have 0 because 0 would represent the set of nothing, and you can't measure nothing. It doesn't make any sense. Another logical inconsistency, paradox. But point being is, like, that's why the general form of the Riemann hypothesis is true. It's because when you root an object, when you try to find where the x-axis and y-axis intersect between an object being graphed, you're asking where the things intersect, where they touch. And so you can't actually touch things physically. The electrons can't actually make contact. And it's also, proving the Riemann hypothesis is literally kind of like the logical opposite of, there's another widely known problem. I don't think it's solved, and I don't know if there's any explicit money offered for it, but it's a huge publicly known, or again, I guess, like within the math world problem, where it's like, if you have a binomial function, I don't know, if you have like a squared plus b squared, or a to the n plus b to the n equals c to the n, you can only have there's no solutions over 1 and 2 or something, or there's no solutions besides 1. But it's really, the logic there is kind of the opposite of that. And so I've already solved those problems, and that's been articulated. That's not the point of this video, so for the physics of it. But we've covered inertia as a vector quantity, obviously, because it is related to force, how much force is required to change its state of motion. So we need, the vector quantities versus scalar quantities, just as is taught today. Symmetry does not exist as well. Keep the concept of chirality. Nothing can be perfectly symmetric because chirality exists. There's nothing else to say. That is a complete proof. Just like ideals don't exist, perfection does not exist, but it is physically driven by chirality, the fact that everything is unique. Everything has its own state of motion, its own being, if you're talking about life, its own existence. All logic is reduced to I don't know with 2 iterations of asking why. Again, R1 stabilized, R0 doesn't exist because it doesn't make any sense. R1 vibration stabilized, mass, light stabilized. R2 frequency and wavelength. R3 mass, things with mass stabilized. Not blah blah blah, but where was I at? This is going to get long again. Like I said, I'm trying to put a bunch of concepts together, and I have to connect all of these things to make this an axiom. But I don't know. Again, take any question, literally any question you can think of, go ask somebody. They'll give you an explanation. To that explanation, ask why until they say, I don't know. If they're being honest, it's because they don't, or if they're being honest, it'll be two responses. Maybe if they know something, and if they don't know, or if they don't know anything and they just lie, then you won't be able to tell. But the point being is that their iteration of 2 is still there, and so again, just another piece of evidence. Tempo, rhythm, the metronome demonstration. Again, I keep having flashbacks to when you have a free moving set of metronomes going at different beats per minute. On a free flowing thing, you have like free flowing thing, 2 cylinders with a piece of wood, and a bunch of metronomes going at different beats per minute. And then they all synchronize, boom, boom, boom. Again, that synergy, that is rhythm equilibrating vibration, because the net vibration of the independent and individual metronomes is 0. The thing goes from there to there. It hasn't displaced any amount of distance, and so it's 0. If it has 0 motion, it's vibrating, and so the metronomes are the vibrating elements, and in relation to the board, the flat board that they're on, and it equilibrates because rhythm increases the efficiency of motion. So all of these words coming together, and now we have to kind of connect that to momentum. So how does that tempo, vibration, and timing kind of then get translated into, how does that relate to momentum and rhythm? Timing is everything. Again, that's another evidence of people saying that, like one side of the equation being defined and the other one being general. Everything. Timing is everything. Timing being way more specific than the word everything. Again, how does rhythm relate to inertia? Rhythm, an increase in rhythm, it makes motion more efficient. So therefore, if you need more force to change an object's state of motion, rhythm limits the inefficiency, or again, how does rhythm and inertia relate? And then I guess the last thing I wanted to finish with, well, I guess there's 2 kind of things, but I guess it's really kind of the same. But cross multiplication. Let me make sure I'm still rolling. Okay, so cross multiplication. Going way back to 3rd grade. What is that? What are you doing? What is the motivation to have cross multiplication? Right. Well, if you're given 2 fractions and you're in 3rd grade and you're asked which fraction's bigger, what do you do? Right. Talk it out loud yourself. Well, you take the 2 fractions and then you set them equal to each other. And then that's the motivation to find the common denominator. And so you find, you multiply the 2 denominators by each other, so they have you divide them by the fraction that gives them the common denominator, and then you can directly compare the numerators and say which fraction's bigger and which fraction's smaller. And so when I'm showing you all of these dichotomistic pairs, again, we talked about that, where I have direct intuition about the connection of these words in a proof setting. What I'm doing is scaling the syllability, right? The syllability is the direct linguistic manifestation of dimensionality, right? We have dimensionality 3. We need 3 sets of directions to map the space, the environment that we're in. We need 3 words to define, to axiomatize, or to establish an axiom. 3 is the first prime number, but in syllability, syllability is how many syllables a word has. And right, so if I have vibration, gravitation, right? So gravitation has 4, vibration has 3, and so we can show the, logical and physical and mathematical consistency through the syllables of the words down to the physics of literally the discreteness of when you have a syllable to begin with, right? I don't know if you guys ever did it when you were a kid, but to define the syllable of a word, how many syllables a word has is you say the word out loud in natural context, and then count how many times you hit your hand or whatever. I forget what it was called. But we did that. But again, we have our logic pyramid. generality spreading out to specificity. The more syllables we use, and then we can use prime number. The prime number limit, again, there's 3 prime numbers, 3, 5, and 7. You take any object, you hold it up to a wall, there's 3 iterations of a shadow, demonstrating the discreteness of the environment you live in. But you can show relationships between the syllability, simply how many syllables are in a word, and how it relates, how it differentiated into, and related to other words. The cross multiplication and what I'm doing with dichotomistic pairs is really kind of the same motivation. It's kind of the same logical application. It's just comparing different words at the right generality. And so again, scaling that generality and specificity is when you establish a proof and say, here is it to somebody else, and they can immediately understand the truth of it and the insight it provides. If you do it with a fundamental ontology, it provides an axiom. So that's really what we're trying to do, is prove the axiomization, I don't know. Like again, see, like I'm trying to generate the right form of the word axiom to use that in that context, but to make sensorality an axiom by undeniable empirical evidence showing the complete logical transgression to a word in our everyday environment that everybody uses and already knows. And that is the empirical evidence. And that will solidify sensorality as an axiom once I can drill down that unique sentence, that unique sequence of syllability into again, the undeniable connection to a word that everybody else uses. So that's it for today. Again, I know I'm jumping around. It really isn't people, again, I'm sure the people that actually watch this point or the people that have clicked off immediately are like, he's in a free flow or he's in this. It's like, no, I'm literally, what I'm saying, this information inflow for me personally is so profound, like quick. It's like, I literally start talking about a word and then more theorems and proofs start popping up. And I just have to keep it focused to establish that absolute bare minimum to make it an axiom. Because I've already done this process. And again, all of this is off the top of my head. I just look back at my, I literally just put things I want to cover on the topics I want to cover, and then just start deriving on camera, and I just record it. This is what I do in my head all the time, constantly. Once I turn it off, this process just doesn't stop. And so, thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. We'll be revisiting the logical pyramid with some more insights.